Hello and good morning. What's left of it? Anyway, welcome to our last class session, our last Zoom session on real ear measurement for this spring. We're talking real ear measurement and how things differ among the different manufacturers. That's the topic we covered last week. And I want to announce to you that I have uploaded a new series of notes for this particular unit, Unit 6. The PowerPoint has been slightly changed as well, and I will update that on Blackboard for you as well. There's a few slides from an important study that I have added to the PowerPoint, and the notes are already uploaded. So if you go into Blackboard, into Lessons, and then scroll down to Unit 6, you'll notice that there's a new set of notes. It's highlighted more in black. It's called New Version April 2017. That will include these changes. Let me show you. Good old share screen. The new notes look like this. Software talks, real ear measures walk. And basically, it's what I read to you last week during our Zoom session. There's the whole first page really deals with this one study, an article by Sanders, Studi, and Weber and Mueller. A really good article that describes how the different manufacturers implement NAL 2 and NAL 1 differently, which really throws a wrench into things. Okay, and this study, I read this to you last week. This is what's included in the new notes for April 2017. So if you go into Blackboard, look in Lessons and Unit 6, you'll find these. Print them up for yourselves and have them that way. And again, I will update the PowerPoint as well to include these slides here. I'll show you. These are all the same in the PowerPoint. The new slides are going to be this one here. These 5. This one, and I'll just blow it up here. This guy here, this guy here, 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 and here. And to review, these all come from that Sanders and Studi article. It's really quite remarkable. Look at it again with me. The target is NAL 2. You can see that in red. And this might be for some sloping, mild to moderate sensory neural loss. And so you can see the NAL 2 target. And now watch how the manufacturers, 5 different ones, hearing aid 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, how they each implemented NAL 2. Okay? Or manufacturers, I should say, proprietary fittings. This is actually what we're talking about here. Here's a NAL 2 target for a mild to moderate loss, and look at the manufacturer's proprietary targets from their own fitting methods, not how they implemented NAL 2. That's in the last 2 slides. What we're looking at here is a NAL 2 target for a mild to moderate sensory neural loss. And now you're looking at 5 different manufacturers and how they have each a proprietary fitting method, their own fitting methods. Siemens fitting method, Oticon's fitting method, Bernafon's fitting method. Not NAL 1, not NAL 2, not DSL 5, just their own. Now look at how they roll off the highs. And this is especially for a 55 dB input. Soft. Think of soft as being 50, 55. Average inputs. Same comparison. NAL 2. Here's your NAL 2 target in red. Look at the manufacturer's proprietary methods. Interesting what they do. They take more in the mids. They give more in the mids than NAL 2 would suggest, and less in the highs. And now look for a 75 dB SPL input. Even more in the mids and similar in the highs. It's weird. And in a way, last week I said, in a way, they're almost more linear because compression gives less and less and less gain as the input levels go up, right? But it seems like the proprietary fitting methods, They don't seem to do that. They give, okay, less gain for soft inputs, but they start to give, you know, even the same kind of gain, you might even say, for moderate inputs, and the same kind of gain for louder inputs, if you know what I mean. Whereas compression, and NAL2 is a compression-based fitting method, so it backs off in what it suggests. As the input levels go up, NAL2, because it's a compression-based fitting method, and it assumes WDRC is being used as the hearing aids, and that's what NAL2 is addressing, is WDRC. So NAL2 is accordingly, just like compression suggests, it backs off. But it's like the proprietary fitting methods of the different manufacturers seem to be giving a similar amount of gain as the input levels go up. It's weird. It's like, so let's look at 55. At 1,000 hertz, let's say. No, right in the middle, let's look at 1,500. And so you're getting, like, if your input level is 55, they're suggesting an output level of about 65, because this is output, so that's a gain of 10 at 1,500, sort of, okay, if you're looking right around here. Now let's look at 65. The 65 input, now they're suggesting, again, like now the outputs are hanging around 75. That's like a gain of 10. Again, and then boom, louder input, 75. Now you're looking at outputs around 85. That's a gain of 10. Again, the same gain for soft, average, and loud inputs. That's linear gain. Weird. So that's just that. I didn't make it up. That's what they seem to do. Now let's look at the last two slides. Average REM differences, average real ear to measurement differences between real ear output of the manufacturer's NAL2 algorithm versus AudioScan NAL2 targets. And that's for, we're going to look at this slide, 55 dB SPL inputs, and the last slide, 65 dB SPL inputs. Okay, so let's look at 55. And what are we talking here? It's kind of a long title. Average REM differences, average real ear measurement differences between the real ear output of manufacturer's NAL2 algorithm. In other words, how the manufacturers implemented NAL2. Okay, versus how NAL2 looks like on a real ear system. So NAL2 among 5 different manufacturers, we're no longer talking proprietary fitting methods here. Now that we left that behind, that's in the first 3 slides here. These 2 slides are talking about how the manufacturers implement NAL2. Average real ear differences between output of manufacturer's NAL2 algorithm compared to AudioScan, which is a real ear measurement system, how the NAL2 targets look at on that system, on the real ear system. So 55 dB SPL inputs. Now look at the vertical axis, deviation from the NAL2 target. Here's frequency, and how much do the manufacturers differ from real ear measurements NAL2 targets? So here, again, you had a mild to moderate loss, binked in, some average presbycusis, mild to moderate, probably like 20 down to about 60 or something like that, just some typical sloping loss. And so you'll have NAL2 targets, and they're not shown on here. Okay, what is being shown here is how much the manufacturer's implementation of NAL2 differed from the true NAL2 target for some fictitious hearing loss. If there was no difference, okay, if there was no difference at all, the lines would all be on zero difference. But you've got 5 different hearing aid manufacturers here. And it looks like red is the most true. You know, this hearing aid manufacturer, they're leaving them all nameless, and they do that so that they're not pointing fingers at anybody. Because when you point fingers, you know, as we say, you got 3 long ones pointing back at you. Okay, so anyway, but this one here, the red, it sticks quite true to the NAL2 target as would be seen on a real ear measurement system. It sticks quite true to it. There's not much difference, a little bit here and there, you know, several dB, but close. But look at Mr. Black here. Whoa, or Mr. Purple here. I mean, they're way less. So they buy the rights to use NAL 2. They pay NAL, God knows how many thousands of dollars, to use NAL 2's patented fitting method. They phone off, they contact Australia, and each of the manufacturers borrows and buys NAL 2, the rights to use NAL 2, but then they tweak it. They seem to change it. Why? I don't know. The only true NAL 2 targets are found on real ear measurement systems. All other manufacturers seem to deviate in their implementation of NAL 2. This is for 55 dB SPL inputs, these differences, and here is for 65 dB SPL inputs. And look at the differences are a little bit less for 65. You know, they don't, here at 55, there's quite the difference, and usually a lot less amplification is suggested. But here, the differences are a little bit less, but still, the differences appear among the different manufacturers. And taking this all, here, look at, and here's for 75 dB SPL inputs, for louder inputs. Okay, so rather interesting. And again, now the manufacturers seem to be, again, more in the mid frequencies again. So now they're deviating, not in terms of less, now they're deviating in terms of asking for more. Now, where have we seen that trend before? That was with the proprietary fitting methods that we saw here. There, 55, 65, 75, and we said that we looked at 1500 hertz and we found an average gain of about 10 because the input is 55 here and the suggested outputs hover around 65. That's a gain of 10. Same thing for 65 dB SPL inputs. Okay, around 75 outputs. 75 minus 65 is gain of 10. 75 dB SPL inputs. Outputs kind of are suggested to be around 85. 85 minus 75 is a gain of 10. Once again, that's linear. Now let's look at the last three slides. The differences. Manufacturers are, when they're implementing NAL 2, they're asking, they suggest their targets are around 10 dB, 5 dB less than the true NAL 2. And then for 65, the differences hover, there's a lot less differences. And then for 75, the targets, they seem to be asking for more. And again, that's the same trend we saw for proprietary fitting methods. It's like they seem to be acting more linearly, the manufacturers. There's a strange trend here. Now, I will get out of, I'll stop sharing here. I'll get out of PowerPoint. And I think what I'll try and do is I'm going to get out of PowerPoint here, if I can. Gee, there we go. I'll get out of PowerPoint, and now we'll read what we have here in Microsoft Word. Another thing to note is that the fitting software from the different manufacturers implements common methods like NAL 2 and DSL5 in different ways. And that's what that study looked at. They seem to be there's 4 trends noted here. Less amplification for soft inputs, okay? Reduced amplification for highs, especially for the proprietary fitting methods. More amplification for the mids for 75 dB SPL inputs for loud. And generally more linear gain. So where have we, this is all the stuff we've been describing, okay? And this is true for both their usage of proprietary fitting methods as well as the way they implement NAL 2 on their software. All 4 trends are noted for both cases. So basically it really suggests, and what I did here, and I said this last week too, this is a direct quote out of my new textbook, Compression for Clinicians. It's a direct quote out of chapter 5, which covers real ear measurement. Well, that was then. Now we're going to be talking a little bit today about thin tube hearing aids and RICs. Okay, and what happens in terms of real ear with those types of hearing aids. Open fit and RICs are popular today, as you know. Wide, open vented stock ear molds, hence the name open fit. Always keep a clear difference between open fit and RIC. Okay, because there is a difference. Open fit hearing aids are basically hearing aids that have a thin tube and no wire. I'm going to stop sharing screen and I'll just show you what I can do here today. Okay, I'm going to look at it. Here's a hearing aid. Okay, this might be a RIC, it might be an open fit. I don't have the stock ear mold anymore. That little dome fell off. Nonetheless, always internalize the true difference if you haven't, okay? Open fit just means that in the tube there is no wire. The receiver of the hearing aid is in the body of the hearing aid itself, and sound is traveling through the tube and out into the guy's ear. Open fit, they call it, because usually the dome has lots of holes in it. So it's a great big vent, around 4 millimeters. Yes, you can close it off and make it 3 and 2 by changing the style of the dome slightly, okay? Now RIC, receiver in canal. That would mean that the receiver is here. And if the receiver or the speaker is here, that means that the tube is no longer hollow. It has a wire going through. So the receiver is not in the body of the hearing aid as is in open fit. The receiver is now in the ear, connected to the hearing aid by a wire. RIC hearing aids cost more than open fit. RIC hearing aids are better hearing aids. Open fit are usually low-end hearing aids, low cost. So if budget is a huge concern, go for open fit. If the person can afford it, generally tend to stick to receiver in canal. Just generally a better hearing aid, better sound fidelity because the receiver is closer. In other words, the sound source is closer to the eardrum. Mo better. Okay, so we will now look at some slides here as well as the Microsoft Word notes. Open fit hearing aids became hugely popular around 2005 to 2006. It's good to know this. Okay, that's how long they've been around, a little over 10 years. I remember well when they came out. The first one I ever saw was out of Resound. It was called the Resound Avance, A-V-A-N-C-E, long gone by today's standards. But it was the first really small BTE, little tiny guy with a thin tube, not a RIC. Okay, so now in 2006, read with me, about 45% of hearing aids sold were BTEs. This was a dramatic increase from years before. And in 2006, 17% of BTEs were open fit. Today, almost all BTEs are either open fit or RIC. Now, in these hearing aids, when you've got open vents, and RICs too, okay, RIC hearing aids can use the domes, as you know, with lots of holes in them, but RIC hearing aids can also use a regular Lucite ear mold, a custom ear mold. That's usually suggested for slightly more severe losses, because when you've got such an open vent, you can't provide the amount of gain and output because it'll just leak back out and cause problems. So anyway, open vent is a two-way street. Sound travels in and out. You need more gain to compensate for the loss of frequencies below 1,000 hertz. That's what vents do. They let the lows out. Thin tube effect for open fit BTE. Smaller diameter reduces resonant peaks, especially for the highs. I'll show you that. So more acoustic gain is required to meet the same output targets. I'll show you what I mean. This is not a problem for RICs because their sound doesn't travel through tubing. But let's look at what's happening in the open fit hearing aid. So we'll go now from slide to slide. Let's find these slides down here. Oh yeah, last week I talked about the different manufacturers, having students compare what the manufacturer would suggest versus what really are actually found, but we won't go there. We did that already. So now we're looking at this situation here. Verification of thin tube BTE hearing aids. So you've got some hearing loss, shown here in blue. Basically thin tube open fit BTEs. Recall, in real ear, the job of the reference mic is to make sure, yeah, right, Ted. The job of the reference mic is, which is pointing right over here. Okay, remember this is your probe. Your probe mic is here. Your reference mic is on the black box. Recall, the job of the reference mic is to make sure that the sound level at the ear is constant. Always remember that. If you're wearing the real ear system, loop around the ear, and you move closer to the speaker will reduce its volume in order to maintain the sound that you wanted it to put out. 55, 65, 75, whatever. If you back up, the sound from the speaker will get louder to maintain the level that you suggested for it, okay? So that's what the reference mic is doing. Test that on yourselves on a real ear system sometime. Hang that loop around, get it going with its stimulus, and move back and forth and listen to the effect of what the reference mic is doing. Anyway, sound coming through the vent will be picked up by the reference mic. So not just the sound from the speaker, but also sound bouncing off the drum, leaking out through the vent. That also will get picked up by the reference mic. And when you read the notes here on the bottom, the chance exists for sound traveling back out of the ear canal to contaminate the reference mic of the verification tool and thus provide unrealistic feedback to the verification tool. In essence, it would add to the sound collected at the reference mic and thus turn down the output of the verification tool, in other words, the real ear system, and thus create a possible situation where unintentional overamplification occurs. In English, more sound is being picked up by that reference mic, so therefore the output, you'll turn down the output of the REM system and therefore create a situation where unintentional overamplification occurs. Rather interesting. Let's look at here. Effect of open fit thin tube BTEs. Now, a vent is a two-way street. Sound goes into the vent, sound goes out of the vent, right? Sound can come into the vent, but usually a vent is meant to let the lows out, correct? So here's the lows going out due to the vent. That's what would happen. Now, here is a thin tube effect, okay? A thin tube, here's a regular number 13 tubing, and this is just showing you frequency response of a hearing aid, of some fictitious BTE hearing aid with regular number 13 tubing, with a regular lucite ear mold. You know, the larger hearing aids are the kind with the regular number 13 tubing with 2 millimeter diameter. Here would be dB/SPL output. Here would be, when you're using a thin tube, you lose those highs. Now let's talk English here. What did we cover near the beginning of the course? I'll stop sharing the screen. What did we cover in our very first class? Non-electronic acoustic modifications, right? That included venting, that included filters, which are not found very much anymore in today's hearing aids. Analog hearing aids used filters, and analog hearing aids used filters, and we'll just review this quickly so you see this, to reduce the peaks. Remember? The peaks in the frequency response were reduced by means of a filter. Venting is another effect, okay? So venting is another non-electronic acoustic modification. Filters was another one, but, so we're talking filters to get rid of these peaks, and a third non-electronic acoustic modification was the use of horns. Remember that? And horns aren't seen that much anymore in today's hearing aids either. Horns, filters, and vents were used big time with analog hearing aids, yesterday's hearing aids. Today, the only one of those three that are still used commonly is vents. Filters we can dispense with because they can get rid of the peaks digitally. Horns were used to increase the highs. And I got a piece of paper. Here's your notes. And all I'm going to do is roll them up like a horn. As we showed you several weeks or whatever ago, here's a horn. Okay? The tubing in the BTEs of yesterday's BTEs, number 13 tubing, when it got near the mold, as it went down around the corner and got near the mold, it widened like a horn. And the effect of that was to increase the high frequencies of the hearing aid. Because when you flare out, your high frequencies are increased. You can hear my letters S, F, TH, CH. The high frequencies are increased by the use of a horn. But if I speak backward into the horn, now I'm talking backward. So if I'm speaking backward, now the tube is getting thinner. And the thinner cuts out the highs. In a way, this can be used as an imitation of how people with presbycusis hear. You can simulate what they hear by making a horn like this and talking into it. They can't hear the high frequencies as well. It's the direct opposite of this here. Okay, non-electronic acoustic modifications. So if you imitate the way a person with presbycusis talks, or I should say hears, like this, and then you take some more paper and you start making some background noise, then you're going to have a real problem hearing what I'm saying. Okay? So this is just a way of imitating the realities of our hearing impaired clients. Anyway, back to the picture here, share screen. This all highlights the fact that when you've got something with a thinner tube, you're going to reduce the highs. So thin tube BTEs, the manufacturers had to be very careful to note that that's what was going to happen with that thin tube as opposed to regular 13 tubing. Number 13 tubing has an internal diameter of 2 millimeters. Thin tube hearing aids, open fit thin tube hearing aids, have a tube diameter of 0.8 to 0.9 millimeters. So that's less than half the diameter. So you're really going to lose your highs. So the manufacturers had to make sure they realized that and compensated for that by dramatically increasing the high frequency gain to overcome this non-acoustic loss, this non-electronic loss. Okay, just FYI, just thought I'd tell you. The interesting thing I showed you last, or the previous slide, remember this vent thing? Vent is a two-way street. Sound goes in and sound goes out. Natural sound can leak into the vent, but the vent's purpose is, of course, to let out the lows, right? So sometimes you can get amplified sound and vent interactions. Open fit can give pleasing mixture of in and out sounds, but at similar levels, these don't mix well. Leads to doubling or canceling. It's called a comb filter effect. When you've got interaction between the sounds coming out of the vent and sounds coming into the vent, there sometimes can be phase interactions, thus causing cancellation or doubling. Okay, so this is just another consideration to recall. It's just something to be noted. But at any rate, real ear leakage into the reference mic due to the large vent. Look what it says here, and I'll make the slide big. Due to the large vent, sound escapes and contaminates the inputs. Reference mic measures an increase in SPL. Real ear system thus reduces the test stimulus level because the reference mic is picking up more sound. But remember, that reference mic is picking up sound from the speaker as well as sound leaking out through the open fit vent, okay, because the vent is so big. So the real ear system in turn is going to reduce the test stimulus level, okay, coming out of the speaker. It's going to think that there's more sound there than there really is. So it's going to reduce the stimulus level, results in underestimated hearing aid output, which will lead to over amplification. The hearing aid, you're going to compensate. You're going to get a contaminated output right here. See that? So the hearing aid is the real ear system is going to suggest to you, oh, you better increase your gain, increase it to match the target. Here's your targets. So you're getting a contaminated output, meaning it's less than what it really is. So you're going to think, oh, what I got to do is I got to boost up the amplification in the highs to match target, when in reality, the true response is here, but it's contaminated because sound is leaking out of the vent and being picked up by the reference mic. So the sound coming from the speaker is going to back off, resulting in a reduced output. You're going to think, therefore, oh, I better increase things, and you're going to end up over amplifying. Just considerations. Okay, again, shown here, same here. Reference mic measures an increase in SPL. Real ear system thus reduces test stimulus level. The true response really would be here. You're thinking it's this. So therefore, you're going to boost up the hearing aid amplification in the highs. You're going to result in over amplifying. Basically, now let's get out of here and go to our notes and what is suggested to compensate for this. Basically, just lower the reference probe mic module. Just lower it a little bit. Move it a little further down. On that blue loop hanging around the ear, just pull it down a little bit. Why? Because it just makes the reference mic a little further away from the vent. Simple. Don't worry about it. We're going to finish with kind of today with a little study done by Bernafon about 14 different hearing aids from 9 different manufacturers. The client experience was set to maximum on the software, and they looked at 2 different degrees of hearing loss, a mild hearing loss and a bigger hearing loss. And it was an older study, so they're looking at what happened with DSL-4, which we no longer use, and Now 1. Okay, Now 1 obviously is still used. Feedback manager was run if it was recommended by the manufacturer. REM was done with a standard input sentence at input levels of 55 and 70. 55 being soft, 70 being loud. The black lines are manufacturer's first fit to approximate either DSL or NAL1. The red line is the actual target for NAL1. The blue line would be the actual target for DSL4. So let's look at the pictures. Let's look at what we're talking about here. Study with thin tube open fit BTEs, not with RICs, okay, but similar stuff may happen with them, to compare software predictions to real ear verification. 14 hearing aids from 9 different hearing aid manufacturers. Client experience level was set to maximum. Hearing aids were set to either NAL1 or DSL4. Feedback manager was run only if recommended by the manufacturer. So basically, here's the mild loss. And these dots, remember, are just speech on a hearing on an audiogram. Okay, remember there's 100 dots on here showing you the speech banana. If there's 100 dots, notice most of them are clustered around 2000 hertz because that's the most important frequency for understanding speech. I'm just describing to you why the dots exist. You sometimes see this. There's always exactly 100 of them. It's called the articulation index. Each dot represents 1% of what's got to be audible for you in order for you to understand what was said. Not that someone's talking, but to discriminate what the word is. And most of the cues are between 1000 and 4000 hertz. Fewer in the lows, because the lows are mostly vowels. They don't tell you as much what the word is. Okay, enough on. Anyway, so here's the mild to moderate loss. Actually normal hearing and then dropping to a mild loss. Here's a bigger hearing loss. Okay, so that's what they mean by the minimum and the maximum hearing loss. So here's a NAL1 target match for the minimum hearing loss. The true target, okay, for this mild loss, the true target, this is outputs, okay, so the true output target for NAL1, and look at how the manufacturers differ. 14 different hearing aids from 9 different manufacturers. Looky, looky, here comes Cookie. Look at the drop-off in the highs. Here's DSL4. Note DSL4 is a power hungry, especially in the highs, okay? That's just the way it was. But again, look at the variation among the manufacturers in the implementation of DSL4. Interesting. Now we're looking at the maximum hearing loss. This was for the minimum hearing loss, DSL4, minimum hearing loss, NAL1. Okay, now let's look at the max. Here's the NAL1 output target. And here's what actually took place among the 14 different hearing aids of the 9 different manufacturers. Look at this stuff. Always roll-offs in the highs, usually less. Okay? DSL4, none of them hit it. Just something to, now look at manufacturer proprietary formulas. Again, see, so what we're doing here is the same thing as in the Studi Sanders article. We're comparing 2 things here. First, how do the manufacturers implement a specific fitting method? In the Sanders study, it was the implementation of NAL2. In this study by Bernafon, it's the implementation of NAL1. And that was this slide here and this slide here. You got NAL1 and DSL4. How did the manufacturers implement those 2 fitting methods for a minimum loss and a maximum loss? So you got a minimum loss, a maximum loss. How do the various manufacturers implement NAL1 and for the minimum loss, DSL4 for the minimum loss, NAL1 for the maximum loss, DSL4 for the maximum loss. Now we'll jump over to the second thing that was also covered in the Sanders and Studi article. What are their proprietary fitting methods looking like? So here's DSL4, here's NAL1, and look at how the proprietary fitting methods just ding off those highs completely. Look at how much. And then that's for the minimum loss. Now look at for the maximum loss. Again, the proprietary fitting methods knock off the highs. Now, we're not looking at the input levels here, 55, 65, 75. This is all for 65, average inputs, okay? Basically, there's a huge roll-off in the highs. Manufacturers, fitting methods, and real ear measurements. Manufacturers buy the rights to NAL, DSL, etc. But they also alter these to suit their own needs. They also have their own proprietary fitting methods. These really tend to roll off the high frequencies. Why is that? And think to yourself why they do that. They do it because the client will feel more comfortable. The client will probably accept the purchase of the hearing aids. Think psychologically. The wife drags the husband in, forces him to buy hearing aids. He buys the hearing aids, and he basically hears very little difference. Cool, suits him just fine. He doesn't, you know, it's like you think about psychologically what's going on here. Probably it increases initial acceptance of the hearing aids. But remember, we are supposed to be physiotherapists of the cochlea. We are supposed to stretch the cochlea. We are supposed to increase what the cochlea is used to getting. The person's become accustomed to straining to hear sound. That's just basically what's happened. That person has been, the client is always straining to hear. So the initial amount of amplification suggested by the fitting target is not really what you want to do, because the guy has to get used to it. You walk in at the shallow end of the pool. Baby steps, which is good. That's why the software gives you non-experienced, a little bit of experienced, and experienced hearing aid wearer. And you as a clinician are going to see the person after the first week. You'll see the person probably after the second week, and you're going to be making changes to the amount of output that you're delivering with the hearing aid. And usually the amount of change will likely go up because the person's become accustomed to wearing hearing aids. And by the way, BTW, his or her MCL, is also going to go up. If you test someone who's got a mild to moderate loss, let's say the guy's got a hearing loss of around 20 dB in the lows, sloping to about 60 in the highs. And his pure tone average is probably going to be around 30 to 40. And his MCL is going to be very, very low compared to what you think. What's an average MCL in dBHL? An average MCL is between 50 and 60 dB SPL. An average MCL, in, I should say in dBHL on an audiogram, 50 to 60. Okay? An average MCL in dBSPL is going to be between 60 and 70. Average conversational speech is about 65 dBSPL. Average conversational speech in dBHL is around 55. So, you get the guy with mild to moderate loss. Guess what his MCL is going to be? Around 65 dBHL. Average one is 55 dBHL. He's only going to have an MCL that's 10 dB, look at that cut on my finger, 10 dB higher than normal. And meanwhile, he's got a hearing loss dropping from 20 down to 60. And yet his MCL is going to be only 10 dB more than normal. It might be 65 compared to 55, which is normal. Get him to wear hearing aids because he's always straining to hear. That's the way he likes it. It's just unaided. That's the way he's walked around. Give him hearing aids for a year. Chances are now when you retest his hearing after a year, his MCL will probably be 75. more in accordance with what you thought it would be. See what I'm saying? All right. Anyway, clinical little trinkets and tidbits here. All right. Share screen again. We're just about all done here. Manufacturers roll off the highs. Software, let's just take this message home. Software tends to paint a rosy picture. Software tends to overestimate the gain and output of the hearing aid. Real ear almost always shows less than predicted. That's the end of our slideshow. That's the end of our class. End of our slideshow, end of our class. Basically, this take-home message: don't blame the manufacturers. Whatever they do, for whatever their reasons are, who cares? We need their software badly to fit the hearing aids, or we simply can't fit the hearing aids. But always remember, the job of a clinician, the job of fitting the hearing aid, is our job. Manufacturers give us a tool to get us into the ballpark. It's our responsibility to hit that home run so that we finish the fitting by doing real ear. And we do real ear, why? To verify and prove that we are getting what the manufacturer said we were going to get. Okay? Manufacturer software gets us into the ballpark. That's half the battle. It's our job, the onus is on us to finish the fitting by doing real ear, and chances are you will be usually upping things a bit, especially for the experienced hearing aid wearer. For the new hearing aid wearer, heck, proprietary fitting methods might be cool, but don't leave things like that. You do now 1 or now 2, and you will soon find that you are way shy of target. As that person becomes accustomed to the hearing aids, be sure to try and match the target of NAL 2, NAL 1, DSL-5, and remember our little piece of cynicism from earlier on in the course. A man on a flying horse can hardly recognize the difference between the targets of those fitting methods anyway. Shh, don't tell anybody I said that. Adios. Live long and prosper. Ho ho, ho ho. Ciao. Stop recording, Ted. Shut up. Have a good final exam in this class. Be sure to contact me if you have any questions whatsoever. I can be reached by phone at 778-433-9707. I can also be reached by email at venemat@otc.edu, VENEMAT @otc.edu. Ciao for now. See you later.